The morning was bright, with a crisp chill in the air, a sharp contrast to the heaviness I felt inside. Jenna was getting ready for her weekend with the girls, as she called it, packing a bag and pretending not to notice my gaze as I watched from the doorway. 12 years of marriage had led us to this quiet tension where she held secrets, and I held doubts. The signs had started small. First, it was the phone, always in her hand or pocket, even at night. Then, unexplained absences on weekends and excuses that sounded rehearsed. I told myself not to be paranoid, that she was just busy with work or maybe stressed. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That Friday morning, as she slipped into the car with a quick wave, my gut clenched with the confirmation I hadn't wanted to accept. Watching her drive away, I felt a surge of resolve. I was done sitting around with blind trust, and I needed answers. I turned back to the house, feeling an unsettling thrill as I considered what I might find. I decided to start with her office. Jenna worked from home half the time, and her files, notebooks, and that damn laptop she'd practically become glued to were scattered around her desk. Flipping open the laptop, I was instantly met with a password screen. Typical. But I'd seen her type it enough times to know the combination, and within seconds, I was in. I searched her emails, going back months, combing through endless messages about work assignments, trips, and plans with colleagues. The first clue was subtle, a dinner reservation 2 weeks ago that she had claimed was a team-building event. The name on the booking was unfamiliar, Matt. I frowned, feeling the burn of suspicion reignite. The emails between Jenna and Matt weren't scandalous at first glance, filled mostly with friendly banter, but the tone changed as I dug further. I found messages about private dinners, late-night coffee meetups after the meetings, and what I had thought was a work trip to Chicago. It was all too cozy. My stomach churned as I pieced together the narrative, a story she had carefully kept hidden from me. I took a step back, my hands clenching the desk. In that moment, a different kind of shock set in, not the explosive anger I expected, but a bitter wave of calm. It was as if my mind had been prepared for this all along, and now that I knew, the pieces slotted into place with cold clarity. Hours passed, but I couldn't stop. I dug through her phone bills, credit card statements, anything that might show more of her hidden life. Each discovery, each charge to a restaurant in a city she'd never mentioned, each hotel reservation, tightened the knot inside me. There were things she hadn't even tried to hide, like the reservation from last Friday, dinner for 2 in an upscale restaurant in town. I had spent that night at home, thinking she was working late. I knew what I had to do next. I called a private investigator, a friend from my college days who had a reputation for digging up the ugly truths. My friend listened to my story, my suspicions, and then offered advice I hadn't expected: be patient. If she's hiding something, you need solid proof. I felt a new determination rising. This wasn't just about catching her in a lie, it was about preparing myself for what would come next. The next few days, I played the perfect husband, biding my time, watching Jenna like a stranger I was studying. She didn't notice the change in me, or maybe she didn't care. Either way, it worked to my advantage. I waited until she was asleep to check her phone, scrolling through her messages and apps. She'd hidden most of the evidence, deleting conversations, but I found a few scattered texts, coded in ways that barely concealed their meaning. The waiting gnawed at me, yet it was oddly empowering. I had always thought of myself as the easygoing one, the one who let things slide, but now that I was faced with this betrayal, a new side of me emerged. The investigator got back to me within a week. His report was short but damning. Photos, timestamps, and more messages than I could stomach. It was all there, a full map of Jenna's secret world. But I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. I wanted a plan, a way to pull the rug out from under her in a way that would leave no room for her rehearsed excuses. And so, I continued with the routine. I acted as if nothing had changed, waiting for the weekend when she'd be with him, while I put the final pieces of my plan into place. I felt the anger, the betrayal, but most of all, I felt the satisfaction of knowing I would reclaim control over my life. The weekend arrived like an inevitable storm, bringing with it a mix of dread and resolve. Jenna left Friday evening, dressed with an unsettling attention to detail. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she'd gone, mingling with the cold satisfaction brewing within me. I knew where she'd be, and I knew who she'd be with. The investigator had given me all the details: hotel name, check-in time, even the room number. She hadn't just lied to me, she'd rewritten our life with her own twisted version of the truth. After she left, I sat alone, my fingers tapping on the table, tracing the familiar lines of our kitchen. Memories flooded in, the years we'd spent together, the moments I had thought meant something. I had been the fool in my own home, oblivious to the life Jenna had built behind my back. But that was over now. I took a deep breath and grabbed the keys to my car. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I had a more subtle plan in mind. The drive to her hotel was uneventful, almost peaceful. I parked a block away, watching the entrance from a distance. People passed by, couples laughing, sharing drinks and glances, oblivious to the quiet battle raging within me. I spotted her and Matt at the hotel lobby bar. She leaned close to him, her hand on his arm, her smile wide and carefree. It was a look I hadn't seen from her in years, a look I thought had been reserved for me. I didn't make my presence known. Instead, I walked away, returning to my car and letting the rage simmer. My goal was not a public scene, I wanted something that would last, something that wouldn't be forgotten. I returned home and sat in our living room, the quietness of the house pressing in on me. I couldn't just wait, I had to make my move. The plan was already clear in my mind. I spent the rest of the weekend gathering the pieces I needed, compiling every bit of evidence and documenting it meticulously. Emails, photos, receipts, everything Jenna had tried to hide. Each detail painted a portrait of betrayal. I wanted every lie she'd told, every deception she'd orchestrated, laid out in front of her with irrefutable clarity. The investigator had also recommended I secure our finances before making any drastic decisions. Taking his advice, I contacted my attorney that Monday morning. We discussed our assets, the investments, and the house. I'd worked hard to build a stable life, and I wasn't about to let Jenna's betrayal disrupt that. I ensured my accounts were protected, passwords changed, and documentation secured. I wasn't just preparing for a confrontation, I was preparing for an escape. When Jenna returned on Sunday evening, she walked through the door like she hadn't a care in the world. She hugged me, smelling of that same perfume, her arms around my shoulders, her face close to mine. I forced myself to return the embrace, my mind racing as I held the image of her with Matt in the hotel lobby. I played my part, acting the fool for just a little longer. The following days passed in a tense rhythm. Jenna seemed happy, even relaxed. She joked more than usual, her laughter filling the house as if nothing had changed. But I saw through it all, the way she avoided eye contact, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. I was ready to confront her, but I wanted her to feel comfortable, to let her guard down completely. I wanted her lies to come back to haunt her. Finally, on Friday night, exactly 1 week after her weekend with the girls, I was ready. I prepared a quiet dinner, something simple but nostalgic, a reminder of the times when I believed in us. Jenna arrived home, surprised by the effort I'd put into the meal. She commented on it, her voice filled with a light-heartedness that made my blood boil. After dinner, I asked her to sit with me in the living room. She looked at me with mild curiosity, as if wondering why I seemed so serious. I kept my voice calm, steady. "We need to talk," I said, looking her squarely in the eyes. She blinked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face, but she recovered quickly, her expression shifting into one of concern. "What is it?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. "Are you okay?" "Actually, no," I replied, letting the silence stretch between us. "I know about your affair." Her face paled, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. I watched her carefully, studying every reaction, every expression. She started to stammer, her hands fidgeting in her lap. The confident, carefree woman I'd seen in the hotel lobby was gone. In her place sat a stranger, caught in the trap of her own making. "What are you talking about?" she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't lie to me, Jenna. I know everything. I know about Matt. I know about the weekends, the dinners, the hotel." I paused, letting each word sink in. "I've seen you with him. I've read the messages. I know." Her eyes filled with tears, and she dropped her head, the reality crashing down on her. She didn't try to deny it. She knew she was cornered. I didn't mean for it to happen," she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. It just happened. I never wanted to hurt you." I felt a bitter laugh rising, but I held it back. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or did you just assume I'd never look? You've been lying to me, Jenna. Lying every time you said you loved me, every time you said you'd be late for work, every time you left me alone in this house, thinking everything was fine." She wiped her eyes, her expression a mixture of shame and despair. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to know. I felt lost, and he made me feel alive again." "Alive?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "While I sat here, holding this life together, you were out there pretending to be someone else." She broke down completely, covering her face with her hands, sobbing. It was strange, watching her fall apart. I felt no sympathy, only a grim satisfaction. This was what she had chosen, and now she had to face it. As she cried, I reached for the folder I had prepared, a compilation of every lie, every deceit. I placed it on the table in front of her. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, and stared at it, realization dawning in her eyes. What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's your truth, Jenna. Everything you've hidden. I wanted you to see it, to understand the weight of your lies." I leaned back, watching her face contort as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents, photos, receipts. Every page was a punch to her illusion of control. She had thought she could live two lives, thought she could be both a loving wife and a thrill-seeking stranger. But now, with each page she turned, she saw the destruction she had wrought. When she finally looked up, her face was drained, her eyes red and puffy. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. "I thought I could keep it separate, that I could love you and him." The admission stung, but I felt a strange calm wash over me. "You can't love two people, Jenna. And you don't get to hurt someone else to feel alive. That's not love." She nodded, defeated, her gaze dropping once more to the folder. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I want a divorce," I said, the words final and unyielding. "And I want you out of this house by the end of the month." She looked up, her face a mask of horror, realizing that this was real, that her choices had consequences she could no longer escape. She opened her mouth to protest, to beg, but the look in my eyes must have told her it was useless. There was nothing left to say. The life we had built was shattered, and all that remained were the jagged pieces of her betrayal. Jenna's eyes, wide with panic, stared back at me. For a brief moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I'd shared my life with for over a decade. But now, that image was tainted. Every memory, every shared laugh, was shadowed by the betrayal that had poisoned our marriage. The woman sitting before me was no longer the same, she was a stranger whose lies had cut deep. "Please, don't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking as she reached for my hand. I pulled back, her touch suddenly foreign, cold. She flinched as though I'd struck her. "Do what?" I asked, my voice calm, almost detached. "You did this, Jenna. You destroyed our marriage with your own choices." Her hand dropped, and she slumped forward, pressing her palms to her temples as she squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I don't know what I was thinking." I felt a familiar surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay composed. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. I wanted to know how far she'd gone, just how many lies she'd spun. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, and I could see her struggling to find the right words, trying to craft some story that would lessen the damage. But she knew it was too late. Was he the only one? I asked, not because I was curious, but because I wanted the truth laid bare between us, no matter how painful. Or have there been others? Her mouth opened and closed, and I could see her mind racing, trying to decide if the truth would help or hurt her now. Finally, she took a deep breath and shook her head. No, it was just him. It wasn't like that. What was it like, then? I shot back, my voice sharp, cutting through her attempt at justifying it. You betrayed me, lied to me, pretended everything was fine while you were living a double life. What was it like, Jenna? Tell me, because I want to understand what made it so easy for you. She looked down, her shoulders heaving as she struggled to keep herself from breaking down again. It was never easy, she murmured, her voice so soft I barely heard it. I don't expect you to believe me, but I never stopped loving you. I thought I could handle it, keep it separate. I was wrong. I shook my head, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. You don't even know what love is, Jenna. Love doesn't destroy, it doesn't betray. You traded loyalty for excitement, and now you want sympathy? She bit her lip, her fingers twisting in her lap. I know I've ruined everything. But please, can we work this out? Don't throw away everything we've built. We can get help, we can try counseling. Her words rang hollow, desperate, and I could see she was grasping at straws, scrambling to hold onto a life that she had shattered beyond repair. Counseling? I echoed, the bitterness seeping into my voice. Counseling can't fix this, Jenna. It can't erase the lies, the betrayal. Do you honestly think sitting in a therapist's office can undo what you've done? She choked back a sob, shaking her head. I don't want to lose you. I know I made mistakes, but we can rebuild. We can try. No, I said firmly, watching the flicker of hope in her eyes extinguish. You don't get to decide that. I've made my choice. You can stay here for the month, get your things together, but then I want you out. I deserve better than this. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she wept. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something close to pity, but I pushed it away. This wasn't the time for sympathy. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I stood, feeling an odd sense of finality wash over me as I looked down at her. I'm done, Jenna. I'm not going to keep playing this game. I want you to leave by the end of the month, and I don't want to hear any more excuses. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her guilt. Upstairs, I shut the door to our bedroom. The bed that had once been a place of comfort and intimacy now felt like a stranger's. I lay on top of the covers, my mind churning with memories and emotions, anger mingling with a dull ache that seemed to settle in my chest. The next few days passed in tense silence. Jenna avoided me as much as possible, hiding in the spare bedroom, her presence a constant reminder of the betrayal that had fractured our life together. I kept myself busy, focusing on work, spending long hours at the office just to avoid coming home. The house that had once been filled with laughter and warmth felt cold and empty, a shell of what it used to be. One evening, as I was sorting through some papers, Jenna entered the living room, her face drawn and pale. Can we talk? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, my expression hard. About what? She took a deep breath, visibly steeling herself. I know you don't owe me anything, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I need you to believe that I never meant to hurt you like this. I held her gaze, searching her face for any sign of the woman I had once loved. But all I saw was a stranger whose choices had torn my life apart. It's too late for apologies, Jenna. You made your choices, and now we're here. There's no going back. She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she nodded, defeated. I understand, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I'll respect your wishes. I'll be gone by the end of the month. As she turned to leave, I felt a strange emptiness settle over me. This was it, the end of everything we had built together. And as much as I wanted to feel relief, all I felt was an aching hollowness where love had once been. The days leading up to her departure were a blur of tension and avoidance. We moved around each other like ghosts, barely acknowledging one another, our once familiar home now a battleground of silence. She packed her things quietly, boxing up memories and belongings, each item a reminder of the life we were leaving behind. On the final day, she stood in the doorway, her suitcase by her side, her eyes filled with a sorrow I could no longer sympathize with. "I'm sorry," she said one last time, her voice breaking. "For everything." I nodded, offering her nothing more than silence. There was nothing left to say. She walked out, closing the door softly behind her, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The relief I had hoped for didn't come, only a strange numbness that seemed to fill every corner of my being. Days passed, and slowly, the house became mine again. I rearranged the furniture, repainted the walls, did everything I could to erase the traces of her. Each change felt like a step toward reclaiming my life, toward healing from the wounds she had left behind. But the emptiness lingered, a quiet reminder of the love that had once been. I learned to live with it, to accept that some scars never fully fade. In time, the pain dulled, replaced by a cautious optimism, a hope that one day I might find someone who understood the value of trust, of loyalty. For now, though, I was content to let the past rest, to leave the memories of Jenna and our broken marriage in the shadows where they belonged. The future was uncertain, but it was mine, and that was enough. Months passed, and with each day, the weight of my failed marriage lifted. The house, once a painful reminder of betrayal, felt like my sanctuary again. I poured myself into work, found solace in old hobbies, and even reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly, I was learning to live again. One chilly evening, as autumn settled in, I came home after a late work meeting. The house was dark and quiet, as usual, and I flipped on the lights, tossing my keys onto the table. I was about to head upstairs when I noticed something strange, a piece of paper lying neatly on the counter, folded in half with my name scrawled across it in Jenna's handwriting. I froze, staring at it. Jenna hadn't been back since she'd left months ago, and as far as I knew, she didn't even live in town anymore. We hadn't spoken since she walked out that day, leaving behind only a trail of memories I had worked hard to erase. So what was this? I reached for the note, my fingers trembling slightly as I unfolded it. Her familiar handwriting filled the page, but there was something off about it, a shakiness that hadn't been there before. My eye scanned the words, and the further I read, the colder the room seemed to grow. Dear Will, I know I don't deserve to ask anything of you. But I need you to understand something I couldn't tell you before. The truth is, I didn't just fall out of love with you, nor was my affair with Matt as simple as it seemed. There was something else, someone else, I should say, who has shaped all the decisions I've made in the past few years. The first time I met Matt was at one of my doctor's appointments. He wasn't a stranger. I didn't choose him at random. He was recommended to me. He was a specialist, someone I thought I could trust, but things quickly spiraled into something else. What you found out, the affair, the deceit, was only the surface. I left because I didn't want you involved. You deserve better than the mess I was bringing into our lives. And now, I have to face that mess alone. If you're reading this, I'm asking you for one last favor, don't look for me. Let me go. And know that despite everything, I always loved you. I wish things could have been different. I set the letter down, feeling a strange mixture of confusion and dread. The note seemed cryptic, almost like she was confessing something beyond just her affair with Matt. A strange urgency filled me, a nagging feeling that something was left unsaid. Unable to ignore the pull, I decided to make a call. I still had her mother's number, and though I hadn't reached out since the divorce, I figured she might have an answer or at least know what Jenna was going through. The phone rang, and after a few rings, a tired voice picked up. Hello? Hi, Mrs. Rayner. It's Will, Jenna's ex-husband, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, Will, she sighed, a sadness in her tone. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Is everything all right? I hope so, I replied. I found a note from Jenna tonight, and I was hoping you might know where she is. I'm worried about her. A heavy silence fell on the line, and I heard her draw in a shaky breath. Will, I didn't know how to tell you this. Jenna, she's gone. The words hit me like a punch, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. Gone? I whispered, barely able to process it. What do you mean? She passed away 2 weeks ago. I thought you knew, she said, her voice trembling. It was cancer, Will. She'd been diagnosed years ago but didn't tell anyone, not even us, until it was too late. She didn't want anyone to see her like that. The room spun, and I gripped the counter, feeling as though I'd been struck. Cancer? But why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she let me be there? She didn't want to hurt you, her mother said, her voice thick with sorrow. Jenna thought if she left you in anger, you'd be able to move on. She loved you too much to let you see her suffer. But she wanted to say goodbye, so she left that note with me in case you reached out. I'm so sorry, Will. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the counter as her words echoed in my mind. Jenna, the woman I thought had betrayed me, had been carrying a burden too heavy for her to share. The affair had been a mask, a way to distance herself from me, to make me hate her so I wouldn't have to witness her pain. I stared at the note, her words suddenly filled with a meaning I hadn't seen before. Jenna hadn't wanted to leave me, she'd wanted to protect me from the inevitable, to shield me from the grief she knew was coming. I'd spent months resenting her, rebuilding my life in the shadow of her betrayal, never once imagining the depth of her sacrifice. I sat down, the weight of it all crashing over me as I buried my face in my hands. The anger, the bitterness, it all melted away, replaced by a hollow ache that filled my chest. Jenna had loved me enough to suffer alone so I wouldn't have to. And I had let her go, unaware of the price she had paid. For hours, I sat there, reading and rereading her letter, searching for any final message she might have hidden between the lines. I found none, but I felt her presence, a quiet whisper of the love we'd once shared, unbroken by time or distance. The truth of our story had been hidden beneath layers of pain and misunderstanding, but as I sat there, I realized that Jenna had given me one last gift, a chance to remember her without anger, to hold on to the love we'd built without bitterness. In the end, I couldn't bring her back, couldn't take back the months spent in anger and confusion. But as I stood, looking around the quiet house, I knew that she would always be with me, a silent memory woven into the fabric of my life, reminding me that love could endure even the greatest of betrayals. And with that, I closed the chapter, carrying her memory forward, knowing that, despite everything, she had been trying to protect me all along.